Hello, everyone. I'm Del Pearson, technical editor with Microwave Journal, and I'd like to welcome you to the next installment of our online panel series. Today, we have experts from Smiths Interconnect, Corvo, and Rohde & Schwartz online with us to discuss new technologies driving military radar. This panel of device, module, and test and measurement experts will discuss and debate trends in military radar technology, such as high voltage GaN, AI and machine learning in radar, cognitive radar, DRFM developments, new phased array architectures, increased processing power, new thermal management techniques and materials, open architectures, multi-purpose radar, comms, and electronic warfare systems, among other topics. So we're going to have a busy day. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to begin with a brief market overview so we know what we're getting into today. Looking at a radar market overview, the global radar market was valued at $1.6 billion in 2024, growing at a CAGR of 5.1%, leading us to about $2.1 billion by 2030. So sizable market, important conversation we're having. North America was the largest market in 2024 with a 40% market share, and ground-based systems were the largest segment in 2024 with about a 36% market share. Looking at our graph, we can see the share is all around. We have our biggest area, along with ground systems, being air and missile defense, followed by intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and then space situational awareness, others, and navigation and weapon guidance. So quite a few areas we're looking at. And I just went through these, but as a reminder, we'll be going over some semiconductor technologies, AI and machine learning risks and opportunities, a few other developments, and new architectures. Now to introduce our speakers. Joining us today, we have Dave Raymond, Product Line Manager of Board-Level Devices at Smiths Interconnect, Greg Clark, Director of Defense and Aerospace Marketing at Corvo, and Tim Fountain, Head of the Aerospace and Defense Test Market Segment at Rohde & Schwartz. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. And since we have limited time today, only an hour, I wanted to jump right into our questions. So this one is for each of you. What do you each see as the most transformative technology or trend shaping the future of military radar over the next 5 to 10 years?
So I'll jump in first. From the Corvo perspective, it's going to be integration on the hardware side, but I also believe another transformative technology is going to be the use of AI, artificial intelligence.
I'd have to agree there, Greg. From a supplier side and a components manufacturing side, we're looking at the compact radar architectures. That seems to be most present in what's going on in the world today. It seems like our focus in miniaturizing these things so they can be used in more applications. AI's there. They're not, I think, being in the military radar, we're not ready to give control of that away, knowing our military. We'll use AI to enhance some of the features of these structures and architectures to help us. But I think right now it's on the miniaturization of the radar architectures.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's the miniaturization of the components to create the smaller radar system or the smaller system, and that's what that's what a lot of our focus is on. It's a lot of what the government focuses on as well. Correct. You know, with their initiatives with the CHIPS Act and the SHIP RF Act from several years past.
And Tim, from the T&M side, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I think some of the transformative technologies, I think, of direct conversion, ADCs and DACs, will lead to some new applications for radar. Multifunction radar, that basically is an area where we've already been progressing, but radars that do multiple things at the same time. The increase of the number of elements in phased array radars, I think, is a trend that we'll continue to see, going from thousands to tens of thousands of elements, giving radars, better capability, better resolution, range resolution, and so on. And then I think in some ways we're going to also see some older technologies basically re-emerging. For instance, over the horizon radar. with some of the processing that we're now seeing on direct conversion at low frequencies, OTH is coming back mainly because there are some threats that we can't see in any other way. So it's really sometimes a response to the threats that we see out there in the wild, as it were, that leads to some resurgence and some new thinking. So over to you.
That's interesting, Tim, on the over the horizon. Honestly, I hadn't given it much thought, but we definitely see those low frequency, the UHF, VHF type or L-band type systems starting to reemerge. And I say that from the standpoint of I get to see what product is selling. And we definitely see interest there. I won't go into the details of what Qorvo sells, but we definitely see the interest in those bands. Yeah. So I agree with you.
Yeah,
and then I think, go ahead.
Just in preparing our funnel for the next year, we're seeing that too with the radar market, right? Just increases in volume in that area of product.
Yeah, and then I think the other thing that we're seeing is transformative may be the wrong word, but a trend that we're seeing is spectral sharing and spectral redeployment. The valuable frequency, let's say sub 8 gigahertz, because of the operational characteristics of those frequencies, that we're seeing a lot more pressure to more efficiently use and share that spectrum. So there's, again, been all sorts of DoD and DARPA initiatives around spectral sharing, spectral sensing, white space utilization, and a whole bunch of other technologies. But just being more efficient in what is basically a limited resource, being spectrum, and the most valuable parts of that spectrum being, as I said, sub 8 gig, leads to the requirements for more coexistence testing. How do these systems work together without stamping on each other?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Well, I think one other area that at least I believe is going to be there is it's not a resurgence. It's the adoption of the radar bands in KU, that 14 to 17 roughly band. Definitely seeing an uptick in activities and needs that are popping up all across the world.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. We're seeing that in the U.S. as well as abroad, in like Europe. We're seeing the quantities increase. So we know that, the programs are popping up and starting to come to fruition where we've sampled before. So capacity's going to become an issue, I think, in the coming year.
Yeah, and I think the big at least the question for me, being on the Mimic side, is what is the power per element that they need for their particular application. And I've seen anywhere from a quarter watt all the way up to 50 watts per element. I had 50 watts per element at KU band with the efficiencies that are achievable today. That becomes a real thermal problem for the system.
Yeah. And then if we're talking about KU and KA bands, for instance, don't forget there's also competing uses outside of terrestrial applications now with, payload for satellites, increasing just huge constellations of LEO satellites that are also competing for that frequency.
Absolutely.
So it's just really, really congested.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And that's a really good lead-in kind of, Greg, you were talking about the thermal challenges we're going to be seeing. So how are component level technologies evolving to support higher data rates and thermal performance in these compact radar architectures as we're looking at these different bands?
Well, so from my perspective on the PA side or the RF component side, it's, the adoption and investigation into the thermal interface materials, whether that is, directly attached to the semiconductor or a second level thermal interface material. It's also the idea of 3D integration such that you are stacking the PA on top of something else, trying to get the heat source, which is typically the PA, moved away from the antenna so you can get it directly connected to the chassis of whatever the heat sink, which would be in some cases the chassis of the system, or a liquid cooled type process. But there are lots of challenges with that. Every time you introduce an interface, you've effectively introduced a resistor for the thermal resistance. And I'm always cautious when somebody says, "Oh, we have that solved on the thermal interface materials," only to find out, 6 months into the programs that it's not solved because it's an inconsistent material. So where we're doing our work is one, better thermal modeling, highly detailed thermal modeling of the entire system, not just at the component level, but also introducing and staying abreast of what those interface materials are, or what those substrates can be, like the diamond substrates, as well as the new copper mollies that are, I've seen some information about new copper moly technologies coming out, or composites coming out.
Yeah, so we've seen that too. Trying to eliminate as many thermal junctions as possible. We've designed that into some of our products. We're seeing thermal performance issues from customers, and because of the compactness of the new systems, and we're solving it in different ways. So we have our thermopad line, which is our temperature variable attenuators that manages the gain over the differences in temperatures, right? Keeps the gain even. A nice passive way to do it, not an active solution. And we kind of call that like a coarse gain adjustment. And then we're working with customers with different types of, as Greg mentioned, some diamond ceramics, using them for heat sinks in a non-traditional way, because they can't get to the chassis of the unit and they're trying to dissipate the heat, because they don't have that big heat sink or chassis nearby, and they're stacking parts closer together. We're also working with customers in these types of situations where now it's like, okay, you made one part. Can you make two parts and kind of, combine the product and make it a dual function or a triple function type unit? We're seeing that a lot in the LEO space market. And now we're starting to see it in the radar market. So, so that's what we've been kind of seeing, that the customers struggle with. We have some standard products out there, like our patented outrigger resistives that help dissipate the heat without having a heat sink type thing. And we're also integrating it, our ferrites and filters into single components to help with the density and getting size down in these products. That's just another division of what we do.
Awesome.
And then the other thing is too, I don't know if you guys are running, we're actually doing printed filters too, right, on ceramic substrates to get down smaller for the higher bands in the K band type, and we can do those custom. So there's just a lot of things that are coming out, and a lot of challenges. It's kind of a fun time to be in this business as a supplier, because there's a lot of engineer to engineering talk and a lot of collaboration.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and that's a great lead in. Tim, I wanted to ask you, as these technologies are changing on the component and system side, what are you seeing for changes on the T&M side, and how is modular or automated testing playing a role in streamlining these new qualifications and deployment applications?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of challenges around test. As the complexity of these systems increases, and you look at the test matrix of all of the test cases of temperature and environmental conditions that we just talked about, the tests become incredibly long, and it's not really how much testing can I do, but how much testing can I do in the time that I think I've got to do this. And so the cost of test has to be manageable, and obviously the cost of failure of these components, or systems and subsystems that the components go into is a concern. Cost of failure in the field can be life-threatening, so that's obviously a challenge. When it comes to testing things like, for instance, when we talk about GaN, as we look at more signals that have higher order modulation, wider bandwidths, the characteristics change depending on what kind of signal we're operating on, and memory effects, compression, nonlinearity, pre-processing of these, and then when we start packing them together, as we were saying, We then build an array. We maybe have direct connected, antennas. And so then we look at what does the system level test look like? How do we calibrate sidebands, squint angles, gain and phase differences between modules when we assemble these into planks and then into tiles and then maybe into a whole array. And then because our antennas are integrated into these modules like a TR module, we then have to consider, now we have to do over-the-air test, OTA testing. So now we have to move a measurement antenna around. Are we doing that in the near field or the far field, depending on frequency? That can create its own challenges. As we talked about earlier, if we've got each module producing, say, 20 watts of power, we've got 1,000 modules in a system. Not only do we have a heat problem, but we have a power problem and we have a testing problem, especially trying to test an array at full power. And so the complexity of these tests, it can take weeks to calibrate a large phased array antenna that's used in a phased array radar. So the challenges are pretty high, and so cost of test and speed of test become critical. How quickly can we do this whilst maintaining test quality to ensure that we have a viable and a product that meets the specifications that we're standing behind?
So, Tim, just a question on the testing. Do you have standard test plans that you sell to, or is it customer specific?
That's a really great question. So we have a number of market segments. If we look at, for instance, just to compare and contrast, if we look at like the wireless market, right? Traditional cellular, 5G, Wi-Fi, and whatever, that is completely standards driven. And so you can go to 3GPP and say, okay, what is the test I need for blah, 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 right? And they'll say, okay, you need to do X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, 25 steps. And then you can basically say, yeah, this conforms to the specification. In aerospace and defense, we see exactly the opposite. There are no standards because you don't want to publish the standards because then that helps your adversaries understand how you operate. But more importantly, it's also a challenge of making something that is better than someone else's. And therefore, you operate outside of standards because you want to differentiate. You don't have to conform to some standard. So having said that, when it comes to test of systems, subsystems, and even components, yes, there are, of course, if you look at parametric tests at the component level, there are a series of standard tests that you would do. EVM, ACLR, TOI. I mean, there are parametric standards that apply at the component level, but at the system level, what does this box do? You have the goes inters and the goes outers, right? Some of it might be digital, some of it might be analog RF, but at the end of the day, it's really hard to say there are any standards other than, needing to conform to a specific, set of requirements that the customer developed or you develop for a product that you're going to sell to a customer.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because we have an array of even defense customers that go from high reliability space qualification to we'll take your COTS and we'll qualify it in the system, right? So, and what we've done is created a series of standard tests. We have ones to like the MIL PRF 55342, which is the resistor standard, right? They can buy Class K qualified part off the shelf. And then we go down and we do different types of test flows. If they want some kind of reliability, but they're not looking for the full suite, we can do that also. So it's been a learning from talking to the different customers in the base, not just in military radar, but basically across the board.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. You have the limited MIL standards to key off of or reference, but generally speaking, it's unique to every customer with regards to how they want to test it, how they want to calibrate it. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest challenges I've seen for our customers is in the calibration, and why it takes so much time is they have to deal with, environmental variations, process variations, and not just process variations of their system, but process variations of every component in the system. And you start talking about 5,000, 10,000 element arrays, there's a lot of variation that goes on. And as the gallium nitride spokesperson, I mean, today gallium nitride still has variation. Gallium arsenide still has variation for that matter, but it's not quite as significant as what gallium nitride is. But so those are all challenges for the system integrators, for sure.
That's a good lead into another question we have, which is how are improved semiconductor technologies such as high voltage GaN affecting the military radar markets, and how are you leveraging the technology, or what challenges is it bringing?
So for us, we continue to see the need for higher voltage GaN, as well as the smaller gate length nodes. Corville themselves, we continue to advance our capabilities there. How are they affecting the military markets? To me, it kind of remains to be seen. GaN has been adopted widely in the radar market space. In fact, I think although we're adopted, I don't think it's fully, everywhere yet. I also see the SOI, silicon-on insulators, starting to play a more significant role, not just on the back end stuff, but actually at the front ends as well. So,
yeah, I think you're right there. Like the GaN stuff, where it's been used traditionally, they've had the space to remove the heat. It just seems like now that they're condensing systems and stuff, we're seeing it on our side too, right? Where they're looking for. Basically, I think we have the products for them. It's just now it's the designer's opportunity, right? It's where they're having problems. Okay, you make a product that does what I need, but now I got to get the heat out of it. I got to figure it out. I have to figure out a position where I can put this, and that's leading. We have some products like we explained. We have diamond terminations, resistors, and attenuators that are used in high heat applications for this type of thing, and we're using that material and those process capabilities to develop other things to leverage. The other thing I'm seeing now too is where they're putting them in small spaces. We usually make either an SMT product or a wire bondable product. We're seeing that customers want multifunction in one product. They want to be able to solder in certain positions and wire bond in other positions. So they'll need solder dams on the product. So it's really stretching our engineering guys to bring multiple different types of mounting configurations to one product. I say that I bring them opportunities and they do a great job. It's so those are the things we're looking at right now. Because of the small size, it just seems like there's multiple different things now needing a product that weren't in the past. So
yeah, I think some of the other challenges too is maybe not a challenge, but things I see in the marketplace is while we continue to invest in our technology nodes and our capabilities for gallium arsenide, gallium nitride, and SOI, it's the systems have got to be looking to make the change. I'm sure Tim and Dave have the same view of it as well, but once a radar system is released to production and you're on the BOM or it's industries, it could be 10, 15 years before they want to make any change whatsoever. That becomes a challenge because the semiconductor world is moving at a more like a 3 to 5 year pace with regards to change. So, we're on systems now that are probably 15 years old, and those are going to be harder and harder to support because those technologies are going to become less and less available. Not just my technologies, but I'm sure Dave is seeing the same thing. Tim's probably supporting it from the software side, or from the test side. How do you continue to test something like that's aged like that?
Yeah, we have that problem with obsolescence a lot, right? We're on on programs that are decades old, right?
Yep.
And having that conversation where we're obsolete and apart is almost like killing their child, right?
It is, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. The B-52 is coming up on 70 years in operation. So the good news is that there have been a series of running upgrades, to engines, avionics. There was an upgrade to the radar on the B-52 and the self-protect system. That's all public information. So, I mean, there is some opportunity for tech insert and tech refresh. The other thing I wanted to say, just briefly, just backing up on something that was mentioned earlier on regarding, as things become more integrated, and you start putting, components together on, substrates and building mimics, and so that's great. It leads to more consistency, but it also leads to some real challenges in tests, because you don't get test points, especially when you put these systems together and it's more of a black box. You just have to analyze it by what you put in and what comes out, and vice versa, rather than being able to establish intermediate measurements that let you know whether a specific subsystem in, say, a substrate is working the way you expect. So in some ways, it really just highlights the fact that we need better modeling and simulation, so that we can understand the performance of these devices earlier in the design cycle, and eliminate potentially some of the challenges of trying to do, as I said, the sort of subsystem probing and component probing that was traditionally done in the past.
Yeah, and I think one other point that I want to make from the Qorvo standpoint is it's not just on the RF side, but we're exploring the other aspects of the block diagram. So we're, especially as we go into the AESA market, the planar phase arrays, you got to worry about the power management, the distribution of your power. So Qorvo is using what we've done in some of our commercial market spaces, trying to apply that to the radar and the defense and aerospace market space. Can be challenging because the commercial world moves at a much different pace than the defense and aerospace radar market space. But again, and one of those big areas is, applying power management ICs in conjunction with our front end modules, in conjunction with the beamformers, so that everything is talking together. And then to carry it even for one step further is, how do you, integrate that with such that everything is talking together with the clocking or the clock side of the design. So.
Yeah, and that leads to power integrity and power assurance being an even more topical subject to talk about. How do we make sure that the power supplies and the power subsystems are doing what we expect over all of the operating parameters that we just talked about? It's, real challenge.
Yeah, I think I have it easy out of all you guys, right? Just on a component level, right? We have one thing to guarantee there, and I can see how when you get to the multi-level sections that you guys are into, it does get more testing heavy. I see too. We use our design and simulation tools to do, and the tools out on the market are getting much better, right? We can go from a design to a product pretty quickly with 95% confidence, that we're going to get the electrical performance we're looking at, instead of building what we call a pizza, which is multiple designs and pick the best one. So we're getting to that point where the quickness of design is becoming key in this area too. And also now we're doing a lot more ice pack modeling, and the characteristics, what the customer is giving us and they want to know, is just more than electrical performance, right? So the keys in the modeling parameters just for the component side have grown, and if you can show that to a customer, it just really gains their confidence in working with you. So.
And on this topic of modeling, simulation, and test, we recently had a panel regarding AI, so I definitely want to talk about that with you all. How are AI and machine learning impacting military radar, and where do you see these technologies introducing opportunity versus risk?
Well, from my perspective, we're utilizing AI to enhance our simulation capability. I'm not a believer that AI is at a state now or will be in the near future that it can do the design for us. To me, it doesn't replace the human ingenuity to optimize a design for a particular application and center it such that it is, manufacturable over and over again with process variation. But we are utilizing the AI such that it, enhances what our engineers are doing, to look at the data, to process the data, to optimize against, known theory, using the theory to optimize the matching networks. From a radar system perspective, I'm not sure, because I haven't had those conversations personally with the system engineers on how they're utilizing the AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, if you can get that out of them, good luck.
Oh yeah,
That's the problem. It's a very tight network there. And once you start delivering some more stuff, they'll open up a little bit more. But I agree with it. On the AI side, from the internal, we use it for summarization and when we're doing some research and stuff. But in the actual radar market, I think, knowing our customers, that loss of control, the cybersecurity issues with it, I just think they're going to use it in certain areas where they can control the information and get better resolution, better information. But I think it's going to be a long time till we have complete AI radar systems. I just don't think the trust level is going to be there yet for that.
Yeah, that's some really good points. So I am a little closer to this area in terms of the operational side of things. So when we talk about AI, I really AI and ML. Let's just call those cognitive. I know AI and ML are different, but let's just call them cognitive systems that can learn and understand and react to the environment in which they're operating. So if we talk about cognitive radars and cognitive electronic warfare, and I really look at those two as two sides of the same coin, right? EW and radar are equal in terms of operational challenges. So the first challenge is related to the complexity of a contested spectrum. So it's easy, relatively, for a human to look at a spectrogram and of frequency, time, and amplitude based on color, for instance, and see something in that environment and understand that that's a hopping radar, right? It's a frequency agile radar, and it has this particular modulation. It's really difficult for a cognitive system to do that level of even basic analysis. So the first challenge is understanding what it is you're looking at from a machine learning or an AI or a cognitive aspect. What is the specific threat that is something I need to be worried about at this particular point in time? And that will change millisecond by millisecond. So then you have this idea of sorting your potential list of things that you've identified into a prioritized list. What is the number one and number two thing I should be paying attention to? What's the thing that is going to jam me or jam my missile or whatever it is? So I think in future systems, we'll still use a mix of parallel and conventional processing techniques. For instance, the classic radar of a static library. Okay, we know what this is because it has certain physical characteristics of frequency and occupied bandwidth and PRI and et cetera, et cetera. They will all give us some understanding of conventional threats. But what we know is that in a period of conflict, that adversaries and us will switch systems into modes that we haven't seen before. They're called wartime reserve modes for an obvious reason. And those wartime reserve modes are not something we've seen before. So the first challenge that the cognitive system has is, how do I recognize something I haven't seen before? And then how do I react to it? How do I create a counter, a jam, for instance? So that basically leads to, what most people think of when they think of cognitive EW and cognitive radar is understanding and reacting to the environment. Well, how do you react to something you've never seen before? What does any cognitive system or AI and ML system need? It needs training,
correct.
Right? Everything's based on training. And in this case, you have to train the system with tens, hundreds of thousands of data sets with minute variations, and then basically guide that system in, okay, that was a good decision, that was a bad decision, that was a good result, that was a bad result, and then use those training data sets to basically Sorry, someone just walked into the room here. Basically, react to that. So synthetic data only gets you so far, but you're not going to be able to basically react to something you've never seen before. So the training happens in the field quite often, right? And you only get one chance. If you don't react properly, you might have the platform taken out of operation at the worst case. And so then the challenge is, how do you report back to some central place what I saw and how I reacted and whether it did or didn't work? Because you're working in a system, in a conflict where you have very limited bandwidth to basically communicate, if you could communicate at all. So how do you send the results or what worked and what didn't work back? And then there's this whole concept of, we talked about static libraries. Well, mission data files consist of, here's the threats that I think I'm going to see in the field. And if those mission data files change because you learned something, that makes a lot of commanders unhappy, because what they sent out and what they validated is not what comes back after a mission. And so that challenge is really hard for a lot of systems to be able to learn and be able to utilize what they learned, because your adversary is probably going to try and confuse the system by creating false data sets and false things to train the AI on. And so what's good and what do you bring back and what don't you bring back? The final challenge I'm going to say here is that there's lots of data out there. The problem isn't data. The problem is classifying and labeling that data so that it can be used when you're trying to train new algorithms. There's no problem in collecting data. The problem is in understanding what you collected, where it was collected, the relevance of that data. And then finally, we have to be able to take the computational resources to the tactical edge. We need those computational resources where we see the threat. We don't have the bandwidth to send that data back somewhere else to some big server farm where we have huge amounts of computational resources that can figure it out and send a result back in 20 seconds. That's no good. If you're in a conflict, that is absolutely not going to work. And so it's a fair statement. Even today, with all the computational power we have, bringing that to the tactical edge, we don't have enough compute power to run the kind of algorithms that need to react in the time frame that we have, in the time frame of relevance. So lots of things to think about there, but it's a really complex challenge. There's lots of promises. There's lots of research. I read lots and lots of papers about people doing cognitive research on radar and EW, and we're still learning.
Tim, do you think this would be, we would flush most of this out in like a commercial setting instead, before it comes to play in any military type setting?
There's lots of simulation. There's lots of ideas about how to, I wouldn't say commercial setting. Let's call it an offline setting where you may do some of this work up front to alleviate some of the computational stress that you have the moment that you see something you haven't seen before. For instance, if you talk about a novel emitter, which is what a warm mode would end up being. But at the end of the day, guess what? Surprise! You haven't seen this before. You don't know how to react to it, and that's it. And you can't break physics. Meaning, you're not going to go from an S-band radar to a KU band radar with the same antennas, or which are conformal antennas. For instance, on embedded in a platform. You're not going to change physics. Those antennas aren't going to work at very different frequencies, but you can change enough things about this kind of emitters that you're looking at that make them something you haven't seen before. So I'm not sure, but it's all about training data and training the algorithms. Long answer to a short question.
It's just interesting to see, to hear from the test side of the group, and because I don't get a lot of that interaction, so just good to pick your brain on these things.
Yeah, no, it's a very complex area. It's an area that is constantly changing, like the whole of the cognitive field. But the challenge is it's people's lives and its platforms at risk if you don't get it right. It's not quite the same as not figuring out how to make a cake better by asking a machine learning algorithm or a large language model, let's say.
Yeah, there's a bit more at stake with these applications.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
important to get it right.
Exactly.
So I'm glad you brought up the combo of radar and electronic warfare systems. So adding communication systems in there. Now that they're converging more on the battlefield, what are the trade-offs in designing and testing these multi-purpose platforms? You just spoke on kind of the software side of things, but I'm curious about the hardware side as well.
It's just increasing complexity, and some of these systems operate at the same frequencies, and some of them operate at different frequencies. So there's a lot of work going on antennas, and having antennas that are usable over lots of different frequencies, and there's lots of amazing kinds of antennas out there. Then, of course, we talk about the digital signal processing behind that to basically deal with radar, EW, maybe comms, providing, for instance, targeting information to something that's in flight, which is part of a radar. And then, of course, the challenges of testing these multifunction systems so that they're going to operate in the way they expect. Also, testing in the face of jamming or an adversarial kind of attack, a physical attack, so over the air. How does the system work, and how does it interoperate? It's no secret that during some of the conflicts 20 to 15 years ago, the most effective jammers were your own systems. They stopped your own comms. So how do you deal with that? You do more testing of coexistence of systems, and more scenario-based testing where you look at how these systems operate in a very complex RF environment. And so that leads to this whole concept of having this huge, a large system that can really create a very complex RF environment that is representative of what you're going to see, and then you can understand at least a little better how the systems are going to operate, because you don't want to operate these in an open air range where you can be monitored and looked at by someone. You do this in a closed environment where you can control what you're doing and what you're creating.
Yeah, on the component side, I think the perceived advantage of multifunction is size and weight for the particular system. So that's part of the swap. The disadvantage that I see is and I'm looking at from a mimic design perspective, is if you're creating a radar mimic, you're primarily looking at saturated power. For the transmitter, you're looking at a comms design. Well, you care about, instantaneous bandwidth and linear power. And fundamentally, those are different designs. So you're going to trade off performance somewhere in these multifunction systems. And then if you take it wide band, which is something else that I've seen in the market space now, they don't want an X-band radar. They want a 2 to 18 gigahertz radar or aperture or system. Now you start affecting the power added efficiency. Again, you can't defy physics. And there's always going to be a trade-off. And then I think the final trade-off that you have to think about is, do I really need that performance? Because it's going to come at a price. And when I say price, I mean dollars. Mm-hmm. Multifunction adds cost, because of the complexity of the system. And then I guess another one that I just thought of is, as we move towards this miniaturization and the higher levels of integration of the components and the functionality, at some point you're going to reach a stage where you can't pack any more good stuff into the box, and you're going to have to decide what's more important. Is it the function of it, or the radar function of it, or is it the comms function of it? But I do believe we're going to see more and more multifunction moving forward, especially as we see the drones and the drone market or the attritable market continue to take off.
Yeah, we're also looking at Golden Dome, right? That's going to be a lot of that, and I think, all of us have some experience with the Iron Dome type systems too. So, yeah, I think in the future we're going to see a lot of that, and I agree with you, Greg. It's going to be the trade-offs, because you can only pack so much in a bag,
Absolutely. As a physicist, I like all this talk about physics. So doing a bit of a pivot turn here, there's another topic I want to talk about, which is open architectures. So the push for those are strong, but are there still technical or security barriers to widespread adoption in radar systems? And how are you and your different groups kind of dealing with that?
So I personally see very little open architecture efforts at both the, especially on the military side. It goes back to something I think, Tim, you may have said it earlier, that, nobody wants to share their information. It's if you share your information, all you're doing is giving your adversary or your competitor, your information. And so I personally don't see open architecture really ever taking off in the industry world.
I have to agree with you. It's when you talk to the engineers and the designers of these radar programs, they're so secretive. The last thing they want to get into is giving their stuff away. They want to own everything you design for them, and I get it, right? They want to have the best of the best, and the open architecture. I think it's all about the security, and also what Greg said. They don't want to give away their secret sauce. Kind of like as we all want work too. We have patents and trade secrets that keep our technology secure too. So I just don't see it in the military market.
I think academia may like to see more of the open architecture, more so than the industry. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so for me, we don't make open architecture, deployed systems. So I don't have a dog in the fight, as it were. But what I see is, if you're looking at things like SOSA and some of the open industry architectures, I think they do have their place. The challenge is that most discussions focus on standardizing hardware and interfaces. Like using PCI Express or 100 gigabit Ethernet or backplane interfaces that are industry standards, right? And that's great. And so you get this commonality of hardware. But what happens is you don't have any commonality in software, and you don't have any commonality in FPGAs that go inside these devices that sit on the backplanes. So you have an open hardware architecture, but you have, I wouldn't say by default closed architectures, but you have barriers because of the implementation of, for instance, DSP processing right up front and right behind an ADC or a DAC, where you have an FPGA that's doing some basic processing, whatever it is, and how that code was created that runs on the FPGA is not standard. I mean, by nature, it's written by someone, and maybe there's some tools that are used to create it, but it's not easy to do one-for-one replacement with one manufacturer with another because of the code that's running on them. It's like trying to change from x86 to some other processor that has a completely different instruction set. Yeah, they're both processors. They both have buses and blah, 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 but they're completely different in their architectures. And so that's where I see when I talk to customers that are looking at using modular open standards, say so just for example, that the hardware is great. The software and the firmware are where the challenges are. There's a lot more complexity of trying to change and swap, those parts of the architecture.
Thank you. So, question for each of you. What advice would you give to defense program leaders trying to future-proof their radar investments over the next decade?
Stay with the leaders in technology. Stay with the Smiths Interconnects, right? You want to partner with us because, too, all of us in this panel, the Corvo parts and the Smiths Interconnect parts, they work well together. I see I've been in several decades in this industry, and we still have the same customer military base because of how we work together, engineer to engineer. They come to us with problems, we solve their problems, and as long as they really need to stay close to their suppliers. You'll see in the commercial world, somebody will be able to get a part a little bit cheaper and they'll move, but they will not do that in this commercial sense or the military sense, because it's all about performance and failure. There's no room for it. So I would just say, keep the relationships with your key suppliers so we can help develop your architecture going forward. And I think the key is what they're doing is standardizing across modules. We're working on several programs in radar that once it gets adopted, it's going through several programs, right? That module is going to get accepted. So I see a standardization across the board too from some of the older programs, but that's what I would tell them. You gotta stick with what works.
So I agree with what Dave said. I would add to that: communicate with your suppliers. Trust that your suppliers value your intellectual property, and we're not sharing it with anybody else. We sign non-disclosure agreements for a reason. We obligated not to share your information. So communications is the key to it all. Is we can't, from a component standpoint, we can't design it if we don't know it, what it needs to be. And if a late breaking spec change occurs deep into the design, it will have a significant impact on the schedule or potentially the cost of the component. So communications is always critical from my standpoint to make sure they future-proof their systems.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of echo what Greg said in a little more detail as it relates to this specific industry. For us, I think all of us would say that we can plan for long-term support for keeping products in the market. If you tell us up front, if you tell us 10 years into the program when we're already about to, take that manufacturing line down or whatever, it becomes a lot more difficult to keep a product, a system in operation. If you plan for that up front, and the example that I like to give is a Navy program called ECAS, which is a consolidated automatic support system. It's the enhanced version. And that program, it tests all the avionics that the Navy uses on shipboard platforms. So, whether it's rotary or fixed wing. In that case, part of the program was a consideration of 5-year technology insertions to remove obsolete components and a 20-year planned life cycle right up front from the very get-go. They said, we want 20 years, 5 years to insert new technologies that as the needs change, but also as things go obsolete. And I think that for me, that was a good example of how industry and customers can work together to keep things to keep things running as expected. But you have to have that discussion up front, not 10 years down the line when all the program money's gone and they just say, oh, we need this for another 20 years. That's when the challenges happen.
I think I'll add to that. It's so communication, but also understanding. A request for a semiconductor to exist for 20 years or a process to exist for 20 years, that is a really hard ask in a for-profit industry. It does happen, but you have to have that level of understanding. But you only get that level of understanding when you start talking about it up front.
And Greg, you make a good point there too. Like we have some products that we've kept on for 40 years, right? And you can charge them whatever they want and they'll pay for it, but it really goes against what you're doing in your factory, right? You're disrupting the flow of the floor, and they got to set up a line to do this one job they get every 5 years, so I think you're right. You both are right there, and I'm good. As far as when we're looking at new programs, we have to have a life expectancy on these products, because we've even some of the products, materials aren't available anymore, and then we have to requalify something else. So that's a good point for basically suppliers and manufacturers to take into consideration when they're designing these things. We all love programs that run 40 years, right? but
Yeah.
But it's just tough.
And I think the final one would be realism and forecast. We all live and breathe off forecast, and everybody understands that forecast is exactly as defined. It's prediction of the future. But when we're having those communications and those conversations, ensuring that the supplier and the customer understand what the timing is, what the forecast is, what the needs are, and it's all well documented, those are critical to successful programs. But this is program management 101 to me, but seems like that's what we've run up against all the time.
Yeah, agreed.
So I have one more question after this, but I'm going to pull an audience question quick, kind of on this thread. So are you seeing any challenges with the supply chain, especially with, we'll leave it vague, the way the world is going, or how are you kind of mitigating those challenges as you see them come up?
So I won't go into the details on the Qorvo side, but yeah, we for sure see supply chain issues. With the current geopolitical situation, whether that's, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, or, the trade war, if you want to call it that, between the US and China, it is absolutely affecting the supply chain. The other thing I'm seeing too is what used to be, I would call them the mid-size or even, smaller organizations, they're struggling to stay afloat. And depending on them as a trusted supplier can be very challenging for companies. Kind of goes back to what Dave said a little bit earlier, stick with your suppliers if you can. I'm paraphrasing that, Dave, but
no, that's good.
I'm taking it out of context, but you really have to put a lot of due diligence into your supply chain and ensure that those people are going to be there, not tomorrow, but, a year, 5 years, 10 years out.
Yeah. Being a manufacturer, we basically use raw materials, but Greg's right, man. With all the mergers and acquisitions, right? Somebody gets bought up, a little ink manufacturer that you rely on, and now it's a big conglomerate, and things change. The other thing is like the Rojas and Reach things, right, that are coming through that we're seeing from Europe are affecting supply of critical material, and there's more due diligence we have to do on that. So I think the logistics in the raw material has really grown in the past decade or two, right? We're seeing supply, our customers wanting detailed analysis of breakdowns in our parts, and that we have to go back to the supplier. And that's something now when we're buying something from a supplier, we need all this documentation, right? You have to, and flowing that back through the chain has been difficult with some suppliers, but we've kind of hired a group of people internally to Smiths that work that all out, and it's actually running quite smoothly now.
Yeah, we're not quite as close to some of that, but one thing I would say that doesn't get enough attention is, the law of unintended consequences with some of the trade wars between China and the US has led to some real restrictions on some very basic rare earth minerals that are key and critical to a number of military programs. So, this trade war has had some fairly large impacts on just availability of some of the very basic materials we use to build these semiconductors and processes that there's no answer to other than a political answer of coming together and not having these kind of challenges in the supply chain.
Yeah, the U.S. government, and I know Europe's doing the same thing. They've tried, not the raw materials, but they've tried to address some of those concerns, like with the SHIP Act. You had SHIP RF and SHIP Digital, which Qorvo had a big part of the SHIP RF side of it. The next step, I think, is exactly what you say, Tim, is, now we have to look at the raw materials or the level below the integrate, the capability of packaging and assembly, which is what SHIP was. And that is, where do the PCBs come from?
Right.
Where do the laminates that create the PCBs come from? Where do the resins, where is all of that currently manufactured? And again, it boils down to being quite a bit of a political decision.
It does.
Because industry will search out the lowest cost solution.
Thank you for your comments on that. Another one, kind of in a similar vein with supply chain, I often think is hand in hand with workforce development, because you need really both foundations for a successful product or a successful company. So how are you finding workforce development and workforce hiring throughout this?
There's a couple things we're doing, and I think it plays key with what we're doing in the plant too, right? So we notice with radar, usually you had longer lead times. Things are getting a little tighter, right? So we're trying to beef up our capacity in our plants, instill more automation. Even on the component side, we do a lot of manual testing, RF testing. We're implementing, probe wafer testing up to the high frequency. So it looks like, and we're trying to increase our throughput, basically lead time. We have the capacity to supply these customers, but I think with a greater, and this goes hand in hand with the new space market, right? Because we have customers that just have demand. Well, they like this customer's part because it's cheaper, but they can't get the capacity. So we want to make sure we have the capacity throughput to meet all these needs of it. It doesn't even really matter if it's RF, but I think continuing refocus inward into the facility by upgrading your machinery, your software, your tooling is where we're trying to focus. The other thing, the less time you can keep product in WIP, the more money your company saves too, right? If you can shave 2 weeks off your lead time, that helps in the overall company picture also.
Yeah, so I think of the workforce question as, I've heard it referred to as the brain drain. We're about to have a whole bunch of people retire that are the industry experts. And are they going to be replaced with the next generation of engineers? And my personal view of it is that the RF side of things it's going to be really challenging in the very near future. RF is, while I love it, I don't think it is in the academia what everybody wants to go do. The current buzzword is AI or ML. RF is not a buzzword. It's generally treated as, that's really hard, that's really challenging. So I worry about that from that perspective. And what that really results in is we're going to have to look outside of a traditional RF training in academia to bring in the next generation of MMIC designers, the next generation of module and system engineers. You're going to have to look at the people that are doing physics. Del, you mentioned that.
They're a good option.
They're your background. But that's where I worry on the workforce side. Is I see the RF and especially the defense and aerospace side of it as a very aging community. And that's not just the US, that is global, because I have a global view of what's going on.
Yeah, I was, Greg, you stole what I was going to say, but I was going to say it a little differently. We got the two challenges. We have an aging workforce, and that experience and that knowledge is going to disappear. But then on the flip side, we have a lack of engineers. Engineering is not sexy. It's not perceived to be, one of the bright things that young folks want to go do. And so, especially in the West, the number of graduate engineers and postgraduate engineering is just pitifully low. We don't produce enough engineers. And so I would also say, and I don't have any dog in this fight, but we probably don't pay engineers enough to make it attractive. When they look around and they say, how much can I earn here? How much can I earn here? How much can I earn here? And they're looking at career options. Engineering is hard. It takes a long time. And it's not the stable career that it once was in terms of career progression and financial remuneration. So all of those things together are really challenging.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of us have many dozens of outstanding requisitions for engineering and engineering resources. That is not a problem of paying for them; it's a problem of finding them and keeping them.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think the intern programs, right, that we try to do help us. We've we've brought in civil engineers and converted them to RF, right? So you just really need a smart thinker, and I agree. There's not a lot of RF engineers out there, unless you're a huge company that recruits, the best of the best. It's tough. And we have there's also been an emphasis on women in engineering, right? And trying to find great candidates for women. And it seems like they came in more money than the men, which is good for them. So,
Yeah, I know Corvo. We heavily lean on our intern program. I feel fortunate that every year I have an intern, come to work within my group, and our conversion rate's been pretty high. But
nice.
Again, we do lean heavily on our intern programs.
So. Yeah. And then just going out into academia and every chance you get to stand in front of a bunch of students and tell them about what RF is and how they can contribute and how interesting it is. I do that every time I can.
Absolutely. Me too.
Academia and say, hey, consider this not just AI or what it was a few years ago. I forget what the fad was, but consider something that's challenging but also rewarding.
Yeah, I do the same thing, Tim. Every chance I get to speak to students, I take it.
Yep, exactly.
Before I ask my final question, I'll remind everyone this is recorded so you can share it with all your student friends to get the word out. Well, we are running low on time, so I have my final question, which is, what is the one technology or idea that you think will define the next generation of military radar?
No, I can start. Quantum is one of those things, free beer tomorrow. But there are some real interesting things happening in quantum sensing, quantum radar, quantum clocks, quantum key distribution. AI is the shiny thing right now, but actually there's a lot of research going on in quantum and photonic. For instance, photonic clocks and quantum clocks are a real game changer for phase noise and jitter, and those are key parameters in radar. So that's one area that I think is getting some attention, but if it happens and some of these technologies actually are usable in the way that we would like them to be usable, it will absolutely change the whole landscape.
So I'll agree with Tim on that, especially on the photonics and the quantum, especially for the several years out from a research perspective. Near term, the next 3 to 5 years, it goes back to what we've talked about earlier, and that's the integration of functionality at the hardware level, the miniaturization of the end solution. So that's what's going to drive that is, the smaller nodes in the semiconductors, the smaller gate lengths, the utilization of SOI, silicon on insulator type solutions. And again, I'll reiterate it. Integration of whether that's monolithic or heterogeneous, that is what's going to affect us the most over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that too. We have a fiber group in Smiths, and we're doing fiber optic transceivers and things of that nature. We're looking into RF over fiber, things like that, which will help in the future. Also, just the miniaturization. We're trying to gear up our factory to handle even smaller size parts. Customers want 0201 type products that are higher frequency and things like that. So it's the constant battle of multifunction, smaller size, and just power constraints and frequency. So some of that stuff we kind of stay close to our customers to see which way the market's turning for them, and we follow along, help them out.
Yeah, I've actually seen some, just on that 0201 comment, I've actually seen some requirements demanding 01005.
Yeah, I've seen those chips. We opened it. I think we lost half of them just opening the waffle pack. So
It's like flecks of dust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say also sort of nearer term, I think photonic integrated circuits or PICs have a lot of fascinating properties that are interesting in this industry. The silicon waveguides and having silicon filters and silicon processing all on one chip is pretty intriguing and moving into the optical domain. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. That was a great wrap up, and I was taking some notes to add to our question list for our next radar panel.
Okay.
Quantum will certainly be on the list along with pips and miniaturization, so thank you. In the interest of time, I'd like to close our panel session here. Thank you again, Dave, Greg, and Tim, for sharing your insights with all of us.
Pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Yep,
My pleasure to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank the teams at Smiths, Corvo, and Rhodey again for sponsoring this panel.